Hi, today I will show you an interview I did with Drew Martinez, a.k.a. Carnivero from Texas, where we talked for an hour, shooting 30 questions about how to grow Nepenthes from seeds fast and strong. So coming up. Drew, thank you for spending some time with me to talk about Nepenthes. Everybody knows you. You are the creator and the owner of Carnivero in Texas. So one of the two main carnivorous plants nursery. You're really well known in the Nepenthes world because you sell some seeds, you sell some plants, and I think you have also some tissue culture lab or something like that?
Yes, we do.
So yes, you are literally the one-stop shop for Nepenthes, from seeds to plants. So thank you for sharing with us your knowledge.
Thank you for having me. I really, I think it'll be a fun conversation today. I would love to talk about anything related to Nepenthes or carnivorous plants in general. Okay. I think we're going to talk today a bit about starting Nepenthes seedlings out. And how to get them how to get them to grow quickly and strong and beautiful.
So once they are germinated, I had some people asking me how long it takes to be an inch, and I know from species to species it's drastically changed, but on average, an hybrid, let's say an hybrid.
Yeah, on average, about an inch. You can expect them to get there at about 6 months from germination. Or so. Okay. Again, some species go much faster than others.
Yeah.
And it is also depends on how you're growing them and what type of fertilizer regimen you're using to move them along. So I find that let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about Nepenthes seeds. In general. So we produce a lot of seeds at Carnivero. And, over the years, I've also seen a lot of seeds of most species in the genus. And, they've got a very interesting structure. Most are wind dispersed. So that means that they fly very easily. So you have to be very careful when harvesting them. There are a few species that are not. That there definitely is another mechanism that's at play there whenever you're dealing with those seeds. So when I think about seeds like from something like Nepenthes raja, Nepenthes, something like Attenboroughii or Campanulata, or Mira, or even Northiana, Nepenthes Northiana. These seeds are not as they don't have a wing. You would look at them and you would not necessarily think that they would be prone to wind dispersal. They're probably more something along the lines of water dispersal in their areas.
Interesting. Yeah, I never saw this kind of seeds.
Those seeds. So I just want to caution some people that that there are certain Nepenthes species that don't have the classic-looking seed that you would expect from like a Nepenthes veitchii or Nepenthes truncata hybrid. So some people might see the seeds and then of a different species and quickly think that they were not viable. When in fact there are some species that heavily dominate what a seed looks like whenever they're involved in any of the progeny. Right? I think of something like Nepenthes perlite is a good example. Quite different seed. Very it's black. It's almost like it's closer to a Venus flytrap seed than it is a Nepenthes seed.
So there is the two arms.
Yeah, so it's just a fat kind of. It's not hard like a flytrap seed. So maybe I misspoke a little bit there, but it seems, or maybe more like a Drosser seed than it like large Drosser seed than it would a Nepenthes seed.
Yeah, and even when I received some seeds had like a big bulb in the center.
Yeah.
So that's what we would call healthy, but they were not.
Generally, yes. Generally, there's an embryo in the center, and that's the area. That's actually the important area for the Nepenthes seed to germinate from. You could actually even a lot of the seeds that have those long wings on the edges, you can actually cut the wings off, and the seed will be perfectly fine.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah, because when we saw some seeds, it's really like you need to stop breathing and not sneezing. Like this is very volatile and it will go everywhere. Even sometimes it's static enough to just stick on the paper. That's why I'm cutting them. Yeah. But the embryo sometimes it's really thick. And I had a case where they were not germinating. And some seeds almost without embryo, I just sow them to give it a try and forget about them. And they germinate. So it's not because the embryo is not like fat that it's not viable. So it's I don't know if we have enough information about that. Is that good embryo, big embryo, good seeds, or is just one of the clue?
Yeah, I mean that is something that I've always paid attention to as well. There are when I think about seeds that do not have a pronounced embryo but are still very viable, I start thinking of species like Nepenthes bicacorata and Nepenthes ampullaria, which those seeds, like you can have a seed from there that looks like a normal Nepenthes seed, but it doesn't have the embryo, and your initial thought might be, oh, they're not viable. They just form the seed, but they will actually germinate. And I've bred a few bicows at this point to know that that's just how they are. That's just how they look. They do not have a very long life. A shelf life, and maybe the size of the embryo, this is just a thought. I haven't proven this out, that the size of the embryo could correlate with the amount of nutrients or other things that they have stored in the seed. So that could explain why bicacorata seed lasts no more than 2 weeks. Any longer than that, it just won't germinate.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that it was that sensitive to the time. Wow.
Yes, that species in particular.
Okay. So when you produce your seeds from your crosses, not crosses, but you produce the seeds with 2 different plants, male and female, you sow them immediately, I guess.
Yes. So what we would do if we're sowing those ourselves is we'll first make up the tray. So this is pretty universal among Nepenthes species. We'll make up our standard Nepenthes mix, which is it's got some leach coco coir, sphagnum moss, and perlite. And so we'll add that. We'll either do that in a pot or in a communal tray.
Okay.
And then in that tray, we'll put the media in there, but the top about 1/2 inch to 1 inch, we'll use milled sphagnum moss. So that's just long fiber sphagnum moss that's shredded to very fine consistency. It's almost like fluffy, and that is excellent for seeds to germinate on and put out roots. And also, whenever you go to transplant them, you're not pulling long strands of sphagnum moss that will break the roots of some seedlings that are far away from each other.
Okay, so when you let's say all the seedlings germinate, but they won't be going at the same speed. You will always have the fast-growing one and the slow-growing ones. So you separate them, or you just let them be, and the faster is the winner.
Yeah. So usually with Nepenthes, I find that most seedlings in our conditions will grow at a fairly uniform rate whenever they're a small size.
Interesting.
But it's once they get to about that 1 inch size or so, that's when they really start to separate, like which ones are going to grow faster and which ones are going to be slower. Generally, we just keep them all in the same tray, the communal trays.
Okay.
And we see which one's going to be the winner. So there's at this point we're producing so many Nepenthes seeds.
Yeah.
I feel pretty strongly that it is. It is wise to only be producing the strongest ones if the intention is cultivation, right? This would be different if we were doing something for conservation purposes and we wanted to preserve genetic diversity. But for cultivation purposes, we really want just the strong growers to be the ones that survive. But generally, whenever I have a seed flat, I'll get very high germination rates, upwards of 70%. And then most of those seeds will also make it all the way up until they're about extra small or small size. Like the conditions that I keep them in are very similar to the parents. One very key thing though is seedlings want less light than adult plants. I made that mistake early on, and I had a lot of seedlings that would germinate well, but then they would turn like a light like a lighter green color, that's a key indication that your seedlings are being overexposed. And you don't have very long to correct it before those seedlings are just going to stall out and not do very well over the long term. So if you catch it early, then you will be able to lower the light and correct that. But if you leave them like that too long, they will put themselves in kind of a stasis where they're going to go very slow.
Okay, I will go check my seedlings just after this call.
Yeah, and it's quite easy to have light that's very good for adults, but still overexposed seedlings.
I have a question for you because I just thought about it. Over the years, not often, but I had this case where I have germinations, and suddenly everybody pause and everybody die. No reason. It's like I don't know. Maybe it's a bacteria. Maybe that's a germ. Like everybody looks healthy, but pause and then.
Yeah. How many leaves did they put on?
Probably the first two.
First two. Okay. Yeah, I know what happened. Okay, so I do not know why this happens, but I would love to research this. I'm guessing that seed could have been on the older side.
Okay.
Sometimes if you don't store seed properly or it's very old seed, you can get germination, but maybe it's some type of energy storage that the seed just is exhausted. Whenever they're getting above maybe like 2 or 3 leaves, they'll start they won't be able to make it for whatever reason. And we even see this sometimes in tissue culture. That would be in an ideal environment, you would think. Even if the plants don't have energy stores or whatever, you would think that they would be able to get through that. But in some cases, no. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, what is your secrets for having a seedlings like the first opening to leaves and then growing that to I guess 1 inch or 1.5 inches is extra small or smaller, right?
Yeah. So to get those there the quickest, usually what I do is, we grow most of our Nepenthes seedlings either in intermediate conditions or highland conditions. It's where we have them in the greenhouse because it's very important for seedlings. Like they can be run by weeds. Like generally, whenever Nepenthes are much larger, the weeds don't really affect them too much. It's unsightly, in large pots, but it is very critical to keep your pots weed free until they've at least hit like a 1 inch or so, because they can suck out a lot of nutrients if you're fertilizing. Whenever the seeds are small and the weeds are much bigger than them, they can also occlude them from light, as well as if you go to weed them whenever they've got a larger size than the seedlings, a lot of times that can damage the roots of the young seedlings. So I highly recommend, if you've got a greenhouse, we all have weeds in our greenhouses. If you have a greenhouse with weeds, put a dome over them, something to get to block the seeds from germinating on there. Particularly things of like oxalis, those seeds they fly everywhere, so that can be very very problematic. You like weed free, and then in terms of conditions, we don't put them in any excess humidity that compared to our other Nepenthes. Like we do have them probably at about 70% humidity, 60 to 70% constantly, but we never have to raise it up to that. A lot of people will like saturate them at like 80, 90%. That's really not necessary for germination or growth.
Okay, and some people told me like the warmer the better for going fast, or more fertilizer, or more light. Like there is a lot of different sound outside.
Yeah, well, it's a balance there. So I do find seedlings can take elevated temperatures compared to the adult plants.
Okay.
I've even found some highland seedlings to do well in like intermediate conditions, like even better than in the highland areas of the greenhouse. Yeah. So they can take a little bit warmer. Again, the light, you want a little bit less light. Like when I quantify light, like under artificial light we grow on artificial light because that's usually the easiest controlled. And I try to keep that under 100 ppfd. That's a measurement of photosynthetic photon flux density. So I try to keep that on the lower end of where Nepenthes prefer it. And once they're above about an inch and a half, 2 inches, that's when I'll increase the light. You know, we do have dimmable lights in our greenhouse, so at that stage, that's when I'll start to ramp them up more. In terms of fertilizer, so when they're young, you know, like below an inch, they're too small to use extended release pellets in our experience. The problem there isn't that fertilizer is ineffective. It's because the pellets tend to create hot spots in the media where you've got a spot and you'll notice, you know, like all the seedlings around there grew faster, and then you've got another spot of Osmocote somewhere or Nutricort or whatever extended release pellet you used, and the seedlings around that will be growing faster, but the ones outside of that will be less uniform. So what we use is a liquid fertilizer. We use Maxi. We use Maxi at about 400 ppm, and we'll fertilize usually you know, one to 2 times a month.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. And that seems to get them going along good. Yeah, I pay close attention to the color in the Nepenthes seedlings.
Okay. And what about the watering?
Yeah, so watering, they want to be wet, but not overly wet, just like in Nepenthes. If you're growing slime mold or any type of algae on the surface, it's too wet.
Okay.
You want to have a nice, healthy look to the sphagnum moss. Even though you're fertilizing, you shouldn't be having a lot of growth of you know, slime, mold, you know, like algae, any of that look. That's too wet. I should mention with this caveat, we have very pure water at our greenhouse. Most of the water is either rainwater or reverse osmosis water. So it's very low in salts, like under 20 ppm. I think that's important.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So at what size do you decide to separate them in their own pot?
Well, if it's it kind of depends how desirable of a cross is it. Because inevitably, like you mentioned, some of them are going to go faster than others. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to disturb a seedling in this critical size when it's about an inch. We don't want to disturb it too much. So we prefer whenever we're disturbing them all at once. So I usually let them grow to about 2 inches or so generally. And then at that size, they you know, then I can usually up pot almost all of them, and then we'll up pot them to usually individual pots of that size. We usually like a 3-inch pot. Yeah. So I should mention this, and this is one thing that you can be a lazy grower with Nepenthes and be okay, because the thing is, Nepenthes are masters at nutrient management. In this sense, right? So I'll give you an anecdote here. There's a famous grower. His name's Rob Sacalato. He's in Virginia. Real nice guy. He's operated a botanic nursery for decades. And so I visited Rob one time, and I was taking a look. He had a tray full of Nepenthes Burbigiae seedlings. And I asked him, Rob, how old are those? And he said, oh, these are 20 years old, and they're all small seedlings. And I said, 20 years old, like why don't you up pot them? And he said, well, I want to keep them that compact because I don't have the space to grow them properly unless I keep them that compact. So he fertilized them just enough, I believe, to get them so that they weren't unhealthy and like languishing, but not enough where they're actually like growing rapidly so he could manage his space. So, and we've found this too. We have community trays. And I'll show you some pictures of this. We've got some community trays where we have extra large size pots growing together, and there will be like maybe 200 of these plants in a community tray, which is like you know, maybe just like this big, like 10 inches, 20 inches, and as long as they're getting at least a little bit of fertilization, they're okay. They're okay. They're like, if I did this with other plants, like we grow anthuriums, we breed anthuriums at Carnivero as well, ferns, other things like that. If I let any of those plants go, more standard plants that weren't adapted to low nutrient environments, they would totally, they would just die. They would just languish. They would look awful. But with Nepenthes, even with Sarracenia, with Drosera, like carnivorous plants are masters at preserving nutrients and putting themselves into stasis whenever it's a low nutrient environment. So they're okay. They'll just stall.
Okay, so they are still picturing.
They're still pitchering. Yeah, they're still pitchering. And if you feed a pitcher, like whenever they're in this like kind of stasis mode where they're not growing that fast, it will definitely cause a big jump on that plant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So for, let's say, a medium-sized plant, when you separate them and they grow, you put some osmocote inside the substrate?
Yeah. So, well, once they're in individual pots, then you can start to accelerate them along using osmocote. And this is applicable for almost all species. Some of the really finicky ultra highland species you want to be careful with. For Nepenthes edwardiana, for example, extremely sensitive to root fertilization. I would tread very lightly in that area because they're not going to. Those ones are very difficult to ever get them really to move super fast. And in our experience, the best way for the ones with very sensitive roots is to pitcher feed. That's the safest way to do it. But for the other ones like Veitchii hybrids, Truncata hybrids, lowlanders, like Ampelarias and Rafflesionas or anything, you can accelerate them by putting osmocote or Nutricote in the pot. Usually, the rule of thumb is 1 prill per centimeter of pot size. So I mentioned I was using a 3-inch pot. So I was speaking imperial, right? Like we do in the U.S. It's roughly a 6 centimeter pot that I use, 6 or 7 centimeter pot, and I'll put that many osmocote pellets into the pot. And usually I use a 6-month time release formula. Nothing fancy. Magnesium is important for Nepenthes, I use the vegetable formula you can get at a hardware store. We've done a lot of extensive tests. It really doesn't matter that much. Borneo Exotics also did a bunch of expensive testing as well, like years back. And we've shared our results with each other. Same thing. It doesn't really matter so much, but the exact NPK, but magnesium does seem to matter. You want something that has that's complete, that has magnesium in it.
So the osmocote, you put them in the pot, not inside the pitcher.
No, well, you can also do that. So if at the nursery, we just don't have the time to individually pitch feed, so we'll do that into the pots. But if you really want something to go fast, like if we have a cross or we see in a specific seedling that has an amazing characteristic that, that one's going to be the winner and we want to accelerate that, we will actually both feed it in the into the soil and also the pitcher as well. And so we could either use we could use osmocote, 1 pellet into each pitcher, or we could also go the natural route, and we could use cricket powder. Actually, it's a substitute for flour, but it makes an excellent substitute because it's already ground up, so you can put it even in small pitchers.
Okay, nice. And when you do that, so there is fertilizer in the soil, in the pitcher, and you also spray Maxi?
Yeah. So at that point, once they're fertilized like that, if we have them on osmocote, the Maxi is not necessary. We can do it, but you want to be careful to overdo it. So here's the thing. Whenever I'm growing Nepenthes from seed, I'm trying to get them up to size. I don't really care what they look like, from like 2 inches to 3 inches, unless they're for sale, of course. Then, at that point, then I do care, and I want people to have a very beautiful plant. But if my goal is to get that plant to be as big as quickly as possible, I know that if I root feed pitchers, like Nepenthes are very, I don't know. You could. It's an evolutionary thing, I know they don't have a brain, but you could say they're almost intuitive, in the sense is that like if they have plenty of nutrients coming to their roots, they will not devote very much energy into making very nice pitchers or very large pitchers. So generally, if you're root fertilizing heavily, you're going to get pitchers that are more often less colorful and usually smaller. So the way to really set this up, though, is if you're targeting like medium-sized plants to look very beautiful, you can fertilize, root fertilize, get them to grow quicker, like bigger leaves, get their biomass up, and then at some point you can repot them, or just wait for the fertilizer to run out, and then at that point, then you can expose them to lots of light, and then they're going to put out big, beautiful pitchers with lots of color.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of information.
Let me tell you like a common misconception that people have sometimes. Some people think, my seed, I need to put fungicide on my seeds or else they're going to mold over. In our experience, if your seeds are molding over, they weren't good to begin with. you shouldn't need to apply fungicide onto the seed to prevent them. In fact, that can cause its own problems. Fungicides are generally very high in salts. So you could be setting yourself up for failure there if you're applying fungicide early on. If other common problems that we see, if it's getting too wet on the soil surface, and you get they call it slime mold. Really, it's a cyanobacteria. What works magic is actually hydrogen peroxide.
Yeah.
Just hydrogen peroxide on the soil surface. It will lightly affect the seedlings in the sense that you might get a little browning on the leaves, but it's better than them dying because the soil is too soggy with slime mold.
Okay. Yeah, I did that, and usually, if I'm losing the battle, I will just repot them, even if they are quite tiny, but in fresh media, and then try to manage it. But did you ever had this case? I don't know if it's a coincidence, possibly, but when I had this problem of small seedlings, probably in a centimeter, and I had to repot them because the slime was taking over, then I feel like they are bouncing back. Suddenly, after being in the fresh media, I feel like they are growing faster, but I don't have a A/B test to see if it was just the moment where they were about to accelerate.
Yeah, no. So I think at that point, you're definitely doing them a service, so they're going to respond positively to it. Because under that slime mold, I don't know. I haven't done a quantitative analysis, but I can imagine it's quite anaerobic underneath that stuff. It stays very wet. Like the seedlings do not like it. They get covered. Like the slime literally just like covers the top of the pitcher. So I don't think they're respirating well. Anything there. So I think any type of change in that environment will serve them well.
I would ask this question because I have a lot of people asking me, can you grow highlands in intermediate? Literally, the dream of all growers would be having a grow tent, and inside this single grow tent, having some amara, having some bicacarata. So it's well, one of my dreams is to like breed out enough horticultural crosses and then select away ones that might be more tolerant, where it's possible to do that. But I mean, in the interim, one of the goals is do thoughtful hybridizations that can bring out the best characteristics, and rely on that hybrid vigor to allow them to be able to grow really well in intermediates. So that's one thing that we're doing immediately, and we're working on the species stuff. It takes much longer because they're much slower growing. But let's see. So in terms of growing Highlanders in intermediate, that ranges. Let's see. I'm gonna give a talk soon on Nepenthes ecology, and I'm gonna post this up to YouTube. I just gave it to my team. It was a first pass, and there is an effect there that it's essentially, although a Highland Nepenthes might have a certain altitudinal range, meaning like this one grows at say 1,800 meter, so that it's a Highlander. Sometimes certain species can be more tolerant than others in terms of what their acceptable growing temperatures would be. You could have some species like Boschiana, which is a highland plant. That one can grow as a lowlander or intermediate plant. So I would choose something like that. And then you have others. I find that generally for Nepenthes, it's easier to grow them in a cooler environment than a warmer environment as a general rule, right? So like I know a grower, for example, in Half Moon Bay, California, Josh Brown. He's one of my good friends. He's the owner of Predatory Plants. He has a bicalcarata that he grows in highland conditions right next to his amata. And although I'll say it does not look good in the winter, it looks very sad. But come summer, when their days warm up, even though they're getting cool nights, that plant looks it definitely pictures like bicalcarata, and does all the things that you would think a bicalcarata should do. Like it's quite large. It's a big plant. So I do think I think temperature tolerances might be a little bit wider than people think, just based on some species being more tolerant, or maybe some clones being more tolerant. But there are some species that I say pretty strictly, like I want people to be successful, and I tell them just make a good informed decision whenever you're trying to grow that, because there's nothing, or for me at least, there's nothing more frustrating than spending a lot of money on a beautiful plant and not having it grow well.
So like, for example, Nepenthes hamada, I've never found a hamada that can grow very well in, like, say, intermediate conditions. I really, like, everybody wants to hear it. I wish it was the case. I wish I could tell them. But my recommendation is usually to try to grow a very nice looking hybrid instead, that has those characteristics you want, as opposed to trying to force something that's going to be very difficult to happen.
Yes. And what about the humidity tolerance? We talked about the temperature adaptation, but the humidity, I feel like, because I'm growing on a windowsill, not all species are equal, even if they are in the same temperature range. Some won't like it, a lower humidity, like 60, 50.
Yeah.
It will be the limit, and then they don't like it. So
yeah. So I would say, for whenever you're choosing a species or a hybrid, pay attention to the thicknesses of its leaves, and also how hirsute the leaves are, how hairy they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually a good indicator of what's going to be a bit more tolerant of lower humidity conditions in a household environment. So, and then you may also pay attention to where it's from in the world. For example, plants from oftentimes, not every Philippine species, but the Philippines have more pronounced dry seasons in much of the Nepenthes range than other places like Borneo or Sumatra. So for this reason, I think there are a lot of Philippine species that are a bit more tolerant in terms of temperature and humidity swings, like Ventricosa and Truncata, for example. Also true of like Nepenthes maxima, which has a very large range as well. And grows in Papua, which Papua has much more extreme seasonality than any of those places I mentioned.
Yeah. For me, as you said, Truncata, Veitchii also, surprisingly. Veitchii.
Yes, Veitchii, it's got those nice thick leaves, and it grows in areas that do dry out a little bit as well, like in some areas in central Sarawak. So Veitchii and its hybrids can be quite tolerant of humidity fluctuations. Boschiana as well. That's one that I really like the vigor in parts of its hybrids.
Then I will ask you a question, because something I always wondered is why LVB, Lowii Veitchii Boschiana, is such like the classic. Like every hybrid I see, there is LVB and then something else. Like this is so, I feel like this is a combo. Yeah. Because you have the Boschiana, you have the Veitchii, you have the Lowii, and then this is the good base. Yeah. And then you can build from it. But so why LVB? That would be my first question.
Why LVB? Okay, so I mean, the original Grex was made by Exotica plants, and they had two exceptional Lowii Veitchii that they used. So Lowii cross Veitchii already, that one has a lot of tolerance. At least for me, I've got a couple exceptional plants that I grow actually in our intermediate house, which is more lowland than anything in the summers. And it grows well. It does not skip a beat at all. So you're taking a base like there. You're taking Lowii Veitchii, which is already quite tolerant of those temperatures, and then you're adding in that extra vigor from Boschiana, which tends to impart size and vigor and tolerance into the hybrid. So it was a winning combo that worked for like those plants. I've been growing that Grex for almost 20 years now, and not quite 20 years, but it's like 15 years when I first imported some. And they're outstanding. They're vigorous growers, and they have enough Lowii character for me at least that like it's something very unique compared to a lot of other Nepenthes hybrids, because Lowii characteristics are distinct. And so I like that as a good base. I've got this one plant that is gigantic. It's an LVB. It grows highland, lowland, intermediate. It just doesn't stop. This thing is 16 feet tall in my greenhouse, and it just keeps on flowering and keeps on growing, and it produces gigantic pitchers. We call it our red ruffled one. It's a female. It's super fertile, and yeah, we love working with that one.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there some hybrid you would not do? Like, for example, me, I will just be honest, the hybrid of Baikal Karata, because I love the two teeth. If you are doing a hybrid of that, you lose the only thing that I love about the pitcher. That you lose it fully, but they will be smaller. So it's like trying to have a smaller peristome on VGI. What would you want that? So what is your feeling about that?
Well, I think in general, when you're thinking about Nepenthes hybridization or hybridization of plants in general, it needs to add something. And, you know, what that thing adds depends on, you know, the beholder. Like, are you targeting more vigor? Because, that is something. It's definitely makes it more accessible to people. If you're targeting like, more superlative characteristics, meaning like even better characteristics, like, like you mentioned, sometimes those hybrids might not be worth it. Like a vetii, trying to reduce the peristome on a vetii might not be desirable, right? So there better be something else that comes along with it, to make it worthwhile, worth doing. Let's see. I will say this: sometimes there are hidden characteristics, though, that you don't realize that they come out whenever you start playing around with these things. For example, Bicalcarata, for some reason, I think it's a physical shape of the peristome rib spacing. I've noticed you can get outstanding color from Bicalcarata hybrids. I've got this one. I haven't really publicized it so much, but it's a gorgeous, complex Bicalcarata cross. It's got Campanulata involved and Loya vetii, and it is iridescent. It's dark purple, but depending on the angle you look at it, it turns orange. It's kind of like one of those cars that has two-tone paint to it. Nice. So in that you can't really tell unless you just start experimenting with some of these things, and that's one thing that I found that happens. There's a lot of other. I think there's a lot of other play in hybrids that a lot of different phenotype expressions that we haven't really got to yet because there hasn't been enough playing with those things.
Yeah, and even on hybrid, I see all the seeds. I have like Loya vetii Bosiana by Norciana maxima. Many diversity on the offspring. Some have stripes. Some are plain, dark red, almost like Raja. So it's but then it's almost a box of chocolate. You never know what could be the offspring of this one because of the two siblings would be so different. Yeah. So you select them. I saw, for example, so many times. VGI The Wave or VGI with another tag name, Big Mama or whatever. So that's what you would expect to be passed on the offspring. Okay. Yeah. I would expect those characteristics, but the beauty of genetics is there's always these random mix-ups that you're going to get in there, and they may just lead to just like this winning combo there. So sometimes I'll produce a cross. I mean, it's happened before where there's a cross where I think they're all going to be winners. I think on average, like most of the things that are in there is going to be a winner. And then I see how the cross is turning out, and I'm like, I like one or two individuals, but that's not how I was expecting the cross to go. And then there's other ones that are the complete opposite. It's a cross that I made that I thought it was going to be, let's see what happens. And they ended up being really, really nice. Like I love them all, Okay, yes, that's nice. It's only frustrating to see that you would see the adult picture so many years after doing it. Yeah, so that's the and the thing is, and I think a lot of hobbyists realize this. Ultimately, it's space constraints that really, like after you've already been in a hobby for a while, usually people build up very quickly. Like they'll have a nice collection very quickly, and then it's all about like just choosing what you enjoy at that point, right? Like and you have to make choices in terms of like what's going to turn out really good for you, what you like, and if you're growing out seedlings, I don't know so many people that can grow thousands of seedlings out in their home. I think a lot of people try, but it gets to be a lot. Oh yeah. Really quick, if you're new here, I explain everything about growing Nepenthes on a windowsill or in a grow tent. So if you love pitcher plants, make sure you subscribe. Let's go back to the video now. So on the seedlings, I grow from my seeds. Sometimes there is this slow growing ones, and it's always a struggle to decide which one I will sacrifice, literally. I know I will keep the fast-growing one. Even the normal one will also be kept and sold. Mm-hmm. But the slow-growing one that are that slow at some points, they are taking some space. As you said, the space is a problem.
Yeah.
And they are not growing anywhere. So it's when do you pull the trigger and say, okay, I took the best of it, and then those ones, even if they are alive and almost healthy, they need to go. So
it's a tough job. I think every nursery struggles with this, right? Like understanding what the trade-off is. But the way I look at it is, if I've got, at this point we're producing hundreds of crosses a year. If I don't sacrifice the space for some of these ones that are going too slow, then I'm not going to have space for something else that could be incredible coming down the line. So I think of it like that. And if they're just going so slow, where it just doesn't make sense for us to take care of them, and I don't spot any of these characteristics that make them truly outstanding. Like if I spot an outstanding characteristic early on, like, oh, that's very different. Sometimes I'll have a little section where I'll let those kind of go along. But if it's not going to cut it, then those ones it's for the best to call them. Yeah.
And I guess those fast-growing plants will give most of the seedlings they will produce will be also fast-growing, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a gene, but it.
No, it is. I mean, you think about this, and it's something that I really enjoy about it's just plant hobbies in general is as it gets more sophisticated, as these seedlings are coming through more and more breeding programs, they're selecting out the ones that it makes sense for them to select the ones that are naturally better growers. And so after multiple generations of this breeding, you're getting some that are very, they can be very fast, very, very responsive. It's like I can flower Veitchii out at this point in like 3 years. That's, if we're growing it very aggressively, right? And that would probably have been unheard of, like, a few decades ago, whenever it was just Veitchii from the wild. I don't know how often we would have been able to do that.
In tissue culture, in vitro? Yeah, can you talk about how you do that? Like I guess you sterilize the seeds and then the substrate.
So Nepenthes tissue culture presents its own set of challenges because they have this endophytic fungus that grows inside Nepenthes leaves. You see it whenever the plant's expressing stress. You'll see these spots on the leaves, and it colonizes the plant. And I don't think it's specific to Nepenthes, like where they grow in situ in the wild. It's this fungi just are ubiquitous. They live in almost every environment, and so they colonize Nepenthes leaves. And the problem is whenever a lot of plants, you can go and sterilize them. Like for example, Drosera is a great example. Very easy to just sterilize a leaf and get it into tissue culture. And on Nepenthes, it's very difficult. It can be done, but the percentage of success is quite low. Maybe 5%, 1% sometimes of the samples you put in remains sterile. A lot of times it will appear that they're sterile, but you have to trim them down to just the meristem, a very tiny plant part, and then it takes a very long time to get them to grow up again. So with the Nepenthes, at least us and then some of the other major breeders in the world, like Borneo Exotics, like their process is actually kind of, it's not taking exceptional clones and getting them back into the lab. It's more selecting at random, like, all right, these, I don't know, say it's 20 clones. These 20 clones seem like they've got promise because they reproduce very well in the lab. Therefore, they're commercially viable. We're going to grow out these 20 out. So we're going to keep these flasks 1 through 20, and then we're going to evaluate them like after we planted them out in the greenhouse. At least, but we've got some of the genetic material still in flasks, so they can get that feedback. Maybe a year later, maybe 2 years later, come back and say, okay, this clone is exceptional. This is the one we're going with. And by that time, and then all the other clones, they can either discard or they could just plant out and just say, okay, this is clone 18 or whatever, but it's been discontinued. We're going with clone 10. And that's kind of how the selection process goes for it to make sense, because otherwise it's a lot of labor to try to get meristems into culture. And it has been done. It has been done in the Nepenthes world. It's very difficult to do. For example, one example I can give that it has been done is Nepenthes Saint Gaia or Nepenthes Gaia is quite readily available, at least in North America. And that one was actually Sam Estes' creation. And so Sam documented the process. He told me what he did. He had to create about an entire tray, so about 30 plants of cuttings that he created from his mother plant, and then he gave it over to a lab. And out of those 30 cuttings, they were able to get one to actually get to sterilize and get into culture. And now we have Nepenthes Gaia all around the world now.
Wow,
it was a great plant.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's a lot of luck.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Like the luck is quite important here.
You imagine like some very desirable Nepenthes that everybody wants, like say I don't know, a specific Nepenthes vetii clone, right? Can you imagine? You have to sacrifice 30 cuttings to be able to get that into tissue culture,
and you're not even sure.
Yeah, it's a big risk.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about hybrid.
Yeah.
What is the hybrid that you really hope will be nice? The one that you are creating and you have a lot of hope on it?
Oh, okay. Let's see. We do a lot of hybrids. We do a lot of hybrids. We do a lot of species crosses. One that I'm really excited about is like I mentioned, I love colors, right? So one of the lines that we breed a lot with is Nepenthes Naga. In particular, Nepenthes Naga. There's a purple form that we work a lot with, and I've got male and female clones. So I've bred that with a lot of different things, and I'm really looking forward to that. For example, I would love to have a purple vetii. That is, that would be a dream.
Interesting.
So
yes.
I've crossed that with vetii, like Candy Dreams, for example. I did that this year. I'm anticipating very large vetii like peristomes on it because Naga already has a very wide peristome, but I want to select something that has a purple body but still striped on the peristome, and I think maybe even back crosses there could get us where we want to go. I want to have purple vetii. That would be incredible to me.
Yeah, you just talked about back cross. You said in a round table, I think, about the fact that it was easier to do back cross, back cross 2 species and then species A, B, and then you cross it back with A or B, and you have more success rate than with another one. Can you?
Yeah. So I mean, well, there's different approaches you can take, but you cross A, B, and then you cross back to A or cross back to B. You're going to get hybrid vigor usually associated with that, and the plants will look. They should look quite a bit like the like one of the original species there. I mean, it's like 75% of the original species.
Okay.
So that's one approach that I think could make things a lot more accessible for people that want to grow a species with a certain look, but don't have the conditions for it. A great example of that, for example, was one we've got going that I'm really excited about is we have a giant truncata, and I crossed that one with a truncata loyi. And so what I'm hoping there is it retains the vigor of truncata, but and truncata loyi is not a slow grower either, but it's gonna be like a supersized truncata loyi that grows fast for everybody.
Okay, nice.
Sometimes it's not even species, but I'll give you in theory. So let's say we have A and B, and they cross together readily, but A doesn't cross with C, with whatever species C or hybrid C. But B and C do cross together well. So sometimes what I'll do is take a longer approach and say, all right, I'm going to cross A and B, and then I'm going to cross the offspring, A cross B, and then I'm going to cross that with C, and I'm going to get to where I want to go. For example, a good specific example of this is we were talking about loyi, vetii, bachiana earlier. For whatever reason, I haven't been able to get a lot of offspring from loyi, vetii, bachiana cross truncata. For whatever reason, something in the genetics just incompatible. But loyi, vetii, bachiana is quite a good combination with vetii. Those seeds are very, you get a lot of seeds. It's very prolific when you make that cross. So what I thought to do is take a truncata vetii, one that's especially one that's more on the truncata end, and use truncata vetii to cross with loyi, vetii, bachiana, and that is successful. So if I'm trying to get those truncata-like characteristics, I can go that route.
Very interesting. It's like, yeah, playing pool. Like you have to.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
you cannot go straight. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, you can go after crosses that aren't really compatible, and this is true across plants. A lot of times, plants that are in the same genus but are distant related, you're going to get not many seeds. Like this is true also in anthuriums. I breed a lot of anthuriums too. But and you can do what you want with that. For example, I don't think people appreciate as much Nepenthes raja across Rob Cantley, how big of a deal it is that we have that even available in cultivation. Rob took a big gamble. He pollinated an entire stock of Nepenthes raja with Nepenthes Rob Cantley pollen. He got like a single seed out of that entire stock that was viable. And then he took that seed and he got it into the lab and he painstakingly reproduced that for 10 years to make that available to people. And that's the only way that thing was going to be widely available. Otherwise, it was going to be a seedling that was probably in, maybe after 10 years, it would have been in 2 collections around the world, much less like thousands like it is now.
Wow. And some cross are surprising. For example, me, I'm not toothy peristome. It's not especially what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But I would never thought that Edwardiana by Truncata would be that a beauty. I would thought it would lose the teeth and being just a kind of a Truncata.
Yeah.
But actually it kept it. So it's like very, very impressive cross. Yes,
certainly. I've seen some stunners. There's been a few gredges made around the world of that. And but across the board, that seems to be a great cross. Quite vigorous, retaining the teeth, in the size too. Both Edwardiana and Truncata can get very large size. So, that one's a winner.
Yeah, and I don't know, because maybe of the thickness of the pitcher of Edwardiana compared to Amara.
Yeah.
But yeah, it looks like it's able to accept a wilder range of condition versus just so interesting.
In terms of like shipping seeds, Nepenthes seeds are surprisingly resilient, at least across a few a lot of the species that are used to make really attractive hybrids. For a wide range of conditions. So we're talking like Veitchii seeds in particular, but things like Boschiana, Maxima, Ventricosa, those seeds last a lot longer than you would think for as fragile as they might seem. I've seen, let's see, and it hasn't just been my testing, but I've had tests where I've had those seeds up to 9 months and they've still germinated well and grown on well. And I've actually, so Jeremiah Harris is another big Nepenthes grower, and he's had similar, he actually ran an experiment as well, and he found similar. He said about 9 months, and this is stored dry, but not even in the fridge. Those Nepenthes Veitchii seeds didn't really drop off even after that much time. That is actually extended even longer whenever you properly store them in a fridge, just not frozen, but just a cool fridge.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about pollen then?
Pollen, yes. So pollen can be stored. So you can either freeze it or you can just store it in a regular fridge. The one thing that's really important there is you dry it. You need to dry it out properly. I use desiccant in a jar for at least a couple days, to make sure it's properly stored. And then you get about, if you're fridge storing it, you get about 2 months. If you freezer it, you can get a little bit longer. But more than 2 months, then I'm usually hesitant, unless it's like this phenomenal cross that I'm never going to get a chance to make again. I generally pass if the pollen's more than 2 months old, because it might work, but it might not. And even if it works, I might not get a whole lot of seeds out of it. And we're kind of in the business of making sure that we get good yields.
Okay. What about the flowers? Do you feel, because you have so many plants, that there is more flowers around winter time than summer, or it's fully random?
It's highly seasonal. It is. There are, it's remarkable to me how these plants are, even though they're growing around the equator or roughly, kind of in the tropics, how strongly seasonal they are, even in those environments. Like Nepenthes Veitchii across the board, They flower about the same season everywhere in the range. And Sarawak and Sabah are quite, it's a lot of area. And then they flower very uniformly for us in cultivation, at least. They flower in the fall. So that's after the end of summer. And so that's the flowering season for them. Truncata's on the opposite side. Truncata flowers for us in the spring. Uniformly. Ventricosa is around that time. And then the lowlanders generally flower in the summer.
When it's warmer. Makes sense. Okay. So it's, because I have a cross, and for example, it's been giving me this from September for flower.
Yeah.
And I had to, the last one, I just cut it because I'm afraid of losing the plants or exhaustion. So do you think it's stress? Do you have that sometime on your...
Stress can definitely induce a flower. And in those situations, I see kind of the other signs of the plant. Does the plant look really stressed on its own, even like with the first flower stalk, in which case it might be a stress flower. And then I'm very careful about whether or not I let that thing flower. And also sometimes with the Nepenthes, like I've found if there's a root issue that could be causing stress, some of the easiest thing to do is literally just chop the plant and treat it as a stem cutting to start over again.
Yeah. Okay. You said you have plants like for almost 20 years, the LVB. So what kind of substrate do you use? Because when it's a huge plant, it's not something you can easily repot in 20 minutes. Well,
the Nepenthes are surprisingly, you can pot Nepenthes in surprisingly small pots for their biomass. Okay. And most of their biomass is not in the roots. Most of the biomass is in their leaves and pitchers. So even something that I've had, like, that I was talking about that, like the 15, 20-year-old LVB, that thing, it's only potted in, I think maybe a 10-inch pot. That's it.
Okay.
The only ones, there's only a very few Nepenthes that are that produce so much root that you need to start thinking about very large pots. And that's a few of the ultramorphic species like Raja and Embryo, and maybe a few of the lowland species like Ampelarias and Bicalcaratas and Mirabilis.
Okay. Because we talk about substrate, I have an hydroponic system where literally the plant, the Nepenthes, one of the LVB, is growing with maybe just 1 inch in total of sphagnum. The rest is pure water. Yeah. And there is no root rot. Yeah. It's submerged. So when we talk about Nepenthes not putting too much water on the soil because of root rot, etc., here it's only water. So
you've got a hydroponic system, though, right? That water's moving. It's aerated. Yes. That's a difference. Big difference. Like anaerobic soil that just stays wet and soggy is very different than water that's getting constant flow through that. And we see this not just with the Nepenthes, but other species as well. Hell, even bog species that don't like that anaerobic environment will definitely react, whenever they're not getting any type of aeration, from the water that's being introduced to it. So that's not surprising that you would have that setup, but as long as it's moving, you don't get any root rot or anything.
Okay, yeah, it was surprising because I'm always explaining people on the channel to have a lot of perlite, so it's breed, etc. But I saw a video on YouTube where I think it was from Asia, somebody having all it was lowlander, but all inside water trays, like you would grow your fly traps or your Sarracenia, which is exactly the opposite of what usually we recommend. Yeah, so that was interesting to see. I guess the substrate is different also. A lot of coco. You use coco, you said, right?
We do. So we do. It's coco isn't critical though. We just use it because it's at least the way that we prepare it is kind of cheap. So our mix is about for most of the greenhouses we keep it light and airy because it's there's a lot of mist in our tropicals, our breeder greenhouse. So 2 parts perlite to 1 part sphagnum moss to 1 part cocoa fiber. But we make sure to leach out the nutrients in the coconut fiber. And if we didn't have coconut fiber available, we would swap to orchid bark.
Again, another question about substrate. I had a few species actually, BBGA and Lowii, that was really not liking the substrate they were in. It was 50-50 sphagnum perlite, and it was bad. And then I decided that if they die, I no longer care. It's been 4 years. They look ugly, so I put them in 100% perlite.
Yeah.
And they bounce back. Now there is pictures, etc. So, what do you think about 100% perlite or all the mineral substrate alternative to sphagnum? Do you use them?
I think that's fine depending on your conditions, right? If you were to do that in a greenhouse that didn't get a lot of water, though, that would dry out very quickly. It could be detrimental. But if you're in a setup where it's getting constantly hydrated, I don't think there's any issue. In fact, Lowii would be one of the ones that I would think would respond the best. Lowii, its roots, it uses it doesn't really use those roots for much nutrient acquisition, I believe. Like in the wild, you actually expect Lowii roots. You very rarely find much of a root. I think it's more for securing the plant, than anything. And so I found Lowii can be very prone to rot unless you have excellent drainage. Like some setup, like for our Lowii, we use like a 2-to-1 perlite to sphagnum ratio, and then on top of that we use a net pot to make sure it's extra airy.
So you don't use all the fancy Akadama, all this expensive.
The only time the fancy Akadama seems to be beneficial is for the ones that truly are ultramorphic growing species, and ultramorphic growing species that root into the rock. So that's not everything. Like you hear Edwardsiana, is an ultramorphic species. Well, kind of. Edwardsiana roots go into the moss above the Akadama. Whenever you observe it in situ. Or it grows epiphytically. You never find it growing directly into the rock. But one you do that does definitely grow into the rock is Raja. So I have noticed there is a big benefit to using some of those Japanese soils like Akadama or Kanuma, or in Asia they actually use this cheap soil called burnt earth, which is essentially just they take clay and they fire it. And it's just it makes itself chunky when they do that. But a lot of their soils over there are very mineral rich. So that's been successful as well. I used to work in Singapore for a while, and I will admit I used to go to the garden center and I would buy it was a 20 kilo bag full of this burnt earth stuff, and I would bring it back to the U.S. every time I had a work trip. This is like once a month for a while, and about 5% of the time customs confiscated it, but they just wrote me a little note that says don't do this again. And so I was like, oh well. So about every other time it got through, and so I had a bunch of that stuff for a long time. Works great.
Yeah, and it's not for sale in the US.
No, you don't find that because I bet, I don't know. Do you listen to country music at all? So country music in the US, they talk about the red dirt, red clay that grew up on in the South. If you go through there, I see that stuff and it looks really similar to me as some tropical environments. I think you could take that and treat it similarly to that soil in Asia, and probably achieve really good results. So that's my challenge. Any of your viewers, if they live in the South and they want to mess around and start a bonfire on to fire that soil up, try your Nepenthes in it, especially like Raja or the ultramorphic, see if it works.
Oh, nice. That's going to be a good test. I'm still okay chatting with you, but I ran out of questions. You already answered super fast all the questions, so do you have other stuff to say, like to touch on?
We definitely we can talk a ton, Remy. I don't mind. Let's see. We can have other sessions too. If you have any other topics, let's set it up. This is easy for me.
Okay. Then we will do that. So Drew, thank you for your time and all the knowledge, the information, the tips you gave us. That was very useful. I hope everybody will really have a few nuggets out of it. And yes, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's been a great chatting. Always happy to exchange advice with everybody too. If you guys are interested in anything else or coming up with new ideas, yeah, just contact us.
Yeah, and maybe even if we do a second session of this, I will combine all the questions from people, and then this time we will have like a really Q&A, and that's gonna be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome. That sounds awesome. Great, Remy. And I also mentioned this too. If anybody has specific questions too, and you want to just like type them over, we do lives like every week. We go live on like Instagram and Palm Street. Happy to discuss anything on there too. Like, yeah.
Okay, I will put the links on the description of the video so everybody can see those lives.
Okay.
Okay. Well, have a good day, and thank you again.
Yeah, no, thank you, Remy. It's been great.
I hope you enjoyed this video. What is the tips that you loved the most? That was the nuggets of this video. I know I had two. If you have some questions, shoot in the comments and I will collect all the questions I have, and hopefully next time we'll be able to have a real Q&A with Drew, and he will answer all your questions. That's it for today, guys. Until next time, happy growing.